and answer my queries. Thank you.
I call the honourable member Moana Mackie.
Thank you, Mr Chair, and I hope the Minister isn't just going to sit there like a dried arrangement for the entire committee stage and not answer these very pertinent questions that are being put to him by members of the opposition on what is undoubtedly one of the most important pieces of legislation that we have in New Zealand, which is our biosecurity law, which underpins the very basis of our economy. So I certainly hope that the Minister's scribbling away some notes there so that he can get on his pins and answer some of these questions. And I want to pick up the amendments to the Wild Animal Control Act 1977 and come back to a theme which I think has been running throughout this committee stage debate, which is the danger where you have overlying pieces of legislation, all with different intents, all with different purposes, but essentially governing the same thing. And perhaps nowhere is that more stark than in the area of wild animal control, because there is a natural tension between seeing a particular species as a resource in terms of hunting, the recreational and tourism value that adds, the downstream benefits of that in terms of using the fur, etc., and seeing that same species as a pest under Department of Conservation legislation or under wild animal control legislation. And it's not a tension that's particularly easy to manage, as we're finding out at the Local Government Environment Select Committee at the moment, where we're passing another piece of legislation to overlay all of this, which is the Game Animal Council bill, which was something that the government agreed to do to get Peter Dunn's support for asset sales and other such things that the government's trying to push through with their one-vote majority. So we've got this Game Animal Council bill that's currently at the Local Government and Environment Select Committee, and when you see the submissions and see that tension between the conservationists, who are very concerned that some of these species are no longer going to be governed under the Wild Animal Control Act as pests, but are now going to be seen as a resource, and their concerns that maybe that means that those species aren't, as my colleague Damon O'Connor mentioned, tar, that some of those species, wild pigs, aren't going to be as properly managed as they should be because of these conflicting pieces of legislation, that perhaps pest control strategies are going to be undermined. And, for example, if you look at wallabies and possums, which are mentioned here in Section 80, in Clause 82, they're not under the Game Animal Council legislation that's currently going through Select Committee, but the pest management strategy that controls a lot of those, in particular possums and 1080, there is already concerns coming through from people who are in support of the Game Animal Council, saying, well, 1080 can also be life-threatening to some of the very species that we now want to use as a resource. Then there are natural concerns, and the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment was one who said she wanted to see something there which specifically stated that pest management strategies were not going to be undermined because of a secondary impact they might have on a species which is now going from being considered purely as a pest to being considered as a resource and as something that should be managed rather than eradicated. And so when we talk about amendments to the Wild Animal Control Act, and also the amendment here in Clause 79 to the Ombudsman Act 1975, which amends in management agencies under Biosecurity Act 1993 if they're corporate bodies in their role under pest management plans or pathway management plans. And my concern would be that we don't want to see a lot of farming out away from the government, away from the Department of Conservation, away from the Director of Conservation, who has the responsibility of protecting this valuable conservation land on behalf of all New Zealanders. We don't want to see a lot of that being contracted out, being privatised out, and not having the same levels of transparency in terms of parliamentarians or members of the public ability to find out what's being spent on those strategies, who's carrying them out, how effective they're being, when they're happening, which is always a big issue in local communities who want to know when a 1080 drop is going to happen, is going to want to know what protections are being put in place for other wildlife who might be affected by it. When we look at that Clause 79, where it's talking about suddenly, other corporate bodies who may have a role in pest management strategies, I just want to make sure that the very same stringent controls, the very same stringent standards and expectations that are put on government agencies, and certainly the Department of Conservation comes under fire a lot when people are not happy with their performance in this area, or where people feel that perhaps they've been remiss or haven't been transparent enough or haven't consulted enough with the local community or haven't taken on board the concerns of key stakeholders, including recreational hunters, including iwi. All these are things which come onto the Department of Conservation because of their role as a public body. Whereas I worry that, Mr Chair.
I call the honourable member Moana Mackey.
Thank you. I worry that talking about putting these out to corporate bodies, maybe the Minister might just want to clarify what that means in lay concerns, that we're going to see exactly those same levels of transparency, those same standards, and in particular the ability for the public to get this information around how this is being carried out through the Official Information Act, for MPs to be able to get it through Parliamentary Select Committee hearings, through written questions, that none of that is going to be blocked because now it's with an outside body, arm's length from government, and it can be done well. The Animal Health Board is an example of where possum control has been very, very well managed, but the Animal Health Board comes before Select Committee. The Animal Health Board answers to a lot of these questions. So that's one of my first questions. The next one, again, is going back to what I said, is around that layering, around how you manage that tension between what's a pest and what's a resource, and in particular, in terms of the Biosecurity Act, that is particular because under the Biosecurity Act, we need to make sure that that pest element, or whatever species it is that we're talking about, needs to be taken seriously and is not going to be undermined. And I'd like the Minister to make a personal undertaking that he will not allow legislation such as the Animal Game Council bill that's currently at Select Committee to undermine the pest management strategies, the pest control strategies that the Department of Conservation carries out, or undermine their ability to do that without being constantly questioned because of the impact it might have on other species which are now being seen as manageable and a resource rather than a pest. Now, I want to raise one more issue, which is in the schedules. I'm sure this is just a technical thing, but I'm really struck by this constant changing of words to put it into the word plan. So we have all these laws and regulations that are being amended here, and in every single one, and there's hundreds here, it says omit strategy and substitute the word plan. And I'm wondering whether the National Party has become so sensitive about accusations from the public, from commentators and from the opposition that they don't have a plan on anything, that their excuses, their answer is to now just go through all the legislation they can, and any word that's a vague synonym for the word plan, get rid of it, put in the word plan, so that when the opposition members say, where's your plan, they can say, well, we just changed that word 400 times in the Biosecurity Law Reform Act. So don't tell us we don't have a plan, because we just added another 400 of them here in this one piece of legislation. So maybe that's what it's for, I don't know, maybe it's technical in nature, but I think if you've learnt anything, it's always be wary of those, quote, minor technical amendments, because they're always ones that come back to bite you. And I'd like to know why it is that the word strategy wasn't reasonable, why it is that 400 times this piece of legislation we need to change it to the word plan. And please allay my perhaps cynical but I think somewhat well-founded concerns that this is in response to claims and accusations, quite rightly, that the government has no plan.
I call the honourable member Megan Woods.